hear about some exciting. There we go. We're going to hear about some exciting and innovative work going on in the Downeast Institute that's designed to help strengthen our shellfish fisheries and develop our aquaculture opportunities here in Washington County and beyond. Before that, just a quick note on what to expect. We're going to get a presentation that's going to take about 35 minutes. And so hopefully we'll have as much as 10 minutes for questions. I'd like to introduce you to Susan Hatton, who, there she is. She's on this call, and she and I are going to work together in the background to try and keep things on balance. One of the services we're going to provide is to manage the chat. So if you don't want to hold on to a question to the very end, please feel free to throw it in the chat. We'll try and mix those in, as you saw in the earlier session, the plenary. But there will also be an opportunity to ask live chat questions if something comes up near the end or during the session that you'd like to ask, and we'll try and manage that. Just raise your hand at that time at the end of the presentation if you do have a question. So for now, I'd like to introduce you to our speaker, Kyle Pepperman. Kyle lives in Marshfield and with his wife, Mandy, and his two sons, Ryder and Anson. He attended the UMM, where he studied marine biology and started as a student working there in 2006, and now manages shellfish hatchery and production at DEI. And as someone who works with him occasionally, I'll say he's one of the hardest persons I've ever seen in terms of his work ethic, hardest working persons. So with that, take it away, Kyle.
Thanks, Bob. I appreciate that. You don't know my boss, Brian, very well if you're telling them that I'm the hardest working person.
He's not here at the moment, so you're the hardest.
Great. So I'm going to share my screen and get right into it. And you let me know if this isn't working.
Looks great.
Okay, excellent. Well, thanks again for having me. As Bob said, I'm Kyle Pepperman. I run the Shellfish Hatchery at the Downeast Institute. I'm going to try and get to a lot more stuff than time is going to permit today. So I'm going to run through it pretty quickly to hopefully save time for questions at the end, because I hope people come with some good questions. It's hard for me to gauge what everyone's into. So going to be talking about a lot of different types of shellfish, different species, different aquaculture opportunities for Downeast, Maine, and really some new species for Downeast, Maine. So pretty exciting. For those of you who don't know about the Downeast Institute, we're a nonprofit organization with a goal of improving the quality of life for people in Downeast and coastal Maine through marine research, marine science education, and innovations in culture and wild fisheries. So we have a three-pronged approach to keeping the lights on in our facility, which is not inexpensive. We operate a very large campus in the town of Beals on Great Wallis Island. We have a 1,500 square foot production shellfish hatchery, which is partial commercial, partial research. We have the easternmost marine field station in the United States. We are the marine field station for the University of Maine Machias, which is where I went to school. Fantastic place. We host an education center, a conference center, an 18-bed dormitory, as well as a guest house, a workshop, a marine sample processing facility, as well as an ocean acidification lab and chemistry lab. So we got a lot going on for a little nonprofit. We do have a fantastic touch tank. These are my kids here, my props. The kids love the touch tank, and I encourage everyone to bring their families. Once we open back up and things go back to normal, it's really a great place to visit, and I welcome all of you. As I said, we are a nonprofit, but we do grow some species commercially to get earned income to support the nonprofit. Some of these are at a very small scale. Some of them are at larger scale. We do have several demonstration farms in the pipeline, which you're about to hear about, which will also be some income opportunities. But really, our heart is at a research level. So the first project I'm going to talk about today is small-scale mussel farming in Washington County. And this is a project that we started this year, and at least so far looks to be quite successful. And we're really pumped about it. So this is in partnership with the Downeast Fisheries Partnership and Bob. And what we did was we went out and we had an idea to start some small scale mussel farms in Washington County. And the first part of it was recruiting local fishermen who wanted a side hustle as a mussel farmer. and to like kick the tires on it and see if this would be something that they would like to take on as a side business, or maybe if it's very successful, they'll switch and be mussel farmers. So we have 3 fishermen. 2 of them are up in Cobscook Bay, Elijah Bryce and Butch Harris, and then 1 off of Roke Island, Jake Patron. We applied for 3 leases. They're small leases called LPAs that allows you a 20 by 20 piece of water to call your own. We built 3 20-foot by 20-foot mussel rafts with a unique fiberglass component. We seeded the rafts with large mussels greater than 1.5 inches, and then also put some hatchery seeded ropes, which you'll learn about in just a minute, as well as bear collectors to see if we're getting any wild recruitment of mussels in this area. Because if you're a mussel farmer in the state of Maine right now, you're almost solely reliant on Mother Nature to provide you with your babies for your farm. And sometimes that works out great, and some people are not experiencing that. So the Downeast Institute has developed another way to do things. So part of this project was obtaining plans for a commercial mussel raft. Typically they're 40 by 40, but we wanted to shrink them down to 20 by 20 so that we could fit them onto an LPA, which is much easier to get than a standard lease and much more speedy. We chose to build these using unique fiberglass components. This has really developed a lot in the last decade. Is, you can get an I-beam nearly identical to steel that's made out of fiberglass. Obviously, it doesn't have quite the strength of steel. It's much lighter weight, much easier to handle, and the main thing is much less expensive. So we felt for these small rafts, we were able to get away with this type of construction material, and time will tell whether they hold together. So far, we've not seen a single problem, and they've really been exceptional. We began by fabricating all of the rafts in-house, so that we can take them to the sites and just plug them back together. So this was quite a bit of labor in obtaining the floats, which are custom made, filled with styrofoam, getting the materials on site, cutting them, drilling thousands of holes, making sure everything was going to go together. We're very fortunate to have a large workshop that we're able to complete things like this in. Not many of these things are off the shelf, so we build most of our own components. The rafts were then carted to the intertidal locations adjacent to the aquaculture lease sites. It's kind of difficult to take a 40 by 40 structure down the road, so it was much easier for us to take them to the site in parts and then construct them on the beach at low tide. We had the farmers help to assemble the rafts because it's really important for them to know how things work. Should something go wrong, how do you troubleshoot that? Where do you look for where this thing is going to fail? So it was really important that they knew how the rafts were put together and knew what to monitor. We also made the moorings ourselves. So hundreds and hundreds of pounds of concrete poured into forms. Each one has 4 moorings that will hold it in place on its lease site. So, logistics of just getting these things in the water was pretty intense. Then they were drug out to the lease sites and anchored on site. So then we were ready to start. But it actually starts way before this because we needed something to put on these rafts. The Downeast Institute has been working for the last 8 years to develop the technology to grow blue mussels in a hatchery. And we knew from the start that we didn't want to produce an average product. We wanted to produce an above average and unique product. So one of the fishermen that helped us get started, Evan Young at Blue Hill Bay Mussels, brought us these very unique golden mussels and said 1 out of every few thousand on his farm comes out this way. And he said, can you make them all look like this? I didn't know. I knew how to spawn mussels. I knew how to grow them. So we bred them together. And the first cross, 50% of the offspring came out looking like this. And we thought, oh my gosh, that's pretty cool. This might be real. And then we just continued to selectively breed, get picky with the parents, grow them up, take the fastest looking, most attractive animals, breed them together. We went from 50% to 60%, then it was 70%, then it was 80%. Right now we're producing a product like this picture on the right-hand side of the screen, which is 95% this beautiful golden striped phenotype. And that color stays with them their whole life. They're really a fantastic animal. And, it all starts right at the beginning from spawning the females like this one right here, releasing eggs, fertilizing them, controlling their life, and getting the best yield we can in the hatchery, very similar to what Megan described in her opening. Everything happens under a big roof in controlled conditions. And we're able to go from a fertilized egg to an animal that's ready to leave the hatchery at just shy of 1 millimeter in about 5 weeks. Sometimes it's as quick as 4 weeks. And, you know, just for scale, that little miniature mussel on the bottom left-hand corner, that's the sharpened tip of a pencil. So they leave the facility at an incredibly small size that just looks like a grain of sand. And we set them onto ropes, which we can then deploy out in the ocean. Our favorite type of rope to use is to use lobster rope. So we're basically giving a second life to a waste product that was headed to a landfill. A, it's free, and B, it's very lightweight and easy to handle. And we've scaled up now to where we can produce many hundreds of thousands of pounds of seeded ropes, or what would yield several hundred thousands of pounds for the main mussel fishery. And on top of that, they're just these beautiful golden mussels. And there's a unique opportunity here. Because this is a product that looks different than what anyone else is selling, people are going to be willing to pay more for it just because it's a unique, beautiful product. Also, it's sustainably produced. We're not taking any animals away from Mother Nature to produce this product, which makes it truly unique. And we feel that the value of what was a $2 per pound wholesale price is going to be in the $3 to $4 per pound price. And that is yet to be seen because we just have our first market product going to market this winter. Our partner, Evan Young at Blue Hell Bay Mussels, has helped us develop this unique brand. And he has trademarked the name Maine Gold, which is what he'll be selling around 100,000 pounds in 2021, 2022, with a goal of around 500,000 pounds by 2024. So we're talking a serious amount of mussels coming out of Washington County. So our farm started in a lobster pound nearby the hatchery called Deep Cove. It was vacant, not being used for anything. So in the summer of 2020, we deployed some of our hatchery ropes in there, monitored them over the summer, and they went from empty looking ropes to, oh my gosh, we're chock full of mussels. We have both gold mussels as well as blue mussels, comparing growth and retention, just to make sure the mussels that we're producing are at least at par with what Mother Nature is giving us, and they absolutely were. And by the end of the summer, you see we have there's no more rope, it's all mussels. We let them go over the winter, and this spring, once we had our rafts in the water, we had to get them out. So we went through the process of hauling the ropes up on the floating dock here, stripping all the seed off into fish totes. We were able to use a tractor to lift it up into refrigerated trucks and transport it to our lobster pound for wet storage until we could get it onto the rafts. So you can see this is our lobster pound floating the crates filled with mussels. And the first step is to take these massive amounts of dirty mussels and clean them up a bit, get them into individual pieces. And that's done with this machine called a Declumper. And basically all this machine does is, with a series of brushes, takes these clumps of mussels and puts them into individual mussels that we can then manipulate in the next phase. And this is our facilities manager here, Jeff, running the mussels through and getting them ready to go on to the rafts. So how do you get mussels back onto ropes? Well, you use a machine like this that's called a socking machine. This particular machine comes out of Spain. None of these components are made in the US. They mostly come from Canada and Europe, which really leads the world in mussel production. And this is a process really similar. It's called socking, and I'll show you why. It's really similar to filling like a sausage casing or a hot dog. You run a rope through this machine and it forces the mussels down into a chamber. And in the chamber, the mussels are wrapped in cotton. And what that does is that cotton holds them to the rope and allows them time to form new byssal connections to the rope and to one another. And it comes out like this long tube sock, which is why they call it socking. And then they can be hung from the grow out rafts. That cotton will dissolve in 2 to 3 weeks, and you'll be left with just a rope full of mussels. It's a very simple process. So this was done at our 3 rafts. This is in the yellow chartreuse pants. Here's Elijah Bryce, one of our mussel farmers, our youngest farmer, at his raft next to Treats Island in Copscook. This raft right here is Jake's raft off of Roke Island, getting seated with the ropes. You see they just hang down in the water. In addition to the large seed, we also deployed some of our very teensy tiny hatchery seed. And you can see on this rope here, you can't even see the mussels. They're microscopic. So we hung both blue and gold mussels off of these rafts to see how they'd fare in the oceans here. And I'm happy to report that this is what they look like now. This is a raft, Butch Harris's raft in the Pembroke River. The hatchery seed has exploded. You cannot see any rope anymore. They're just beautiful golden mussels. So we're really happy with the results thus far. This is a shot of the large mussels that were seeded onto Jake Patron's raft off Roke Island. Most of these are ready for harvest at this point. So things are progressing well. The ultimate question is, how do they taste? So Jake had the first taste test with his family. Results came back as delicious. So we're really pumped about that. And then, where do we go from here? Well, we'll need a collaborative effort to help them harvest, because these fishermen have never done this before. Not that we've done it, but we have friends that have, so we know a little bit about it. We've been in contact with local mussel processors to help us clean the product, bag it, and tag it. A huge cost of mussel farming is the processing equipment. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, very expensive. So using local processors that already have the infrastructure is the way that we can do this. And then ultimately, we want to get these into local markets so that we can get the best price for the product, as well as keep the food local. Where do you go to buy local mussels in Washington County? There aren't very many places. So we want to give a new food resource. And then we got to repeat the process and continue, because 1 year does not a trend make. So we need to reseed these rafts and keep the production going, while at the same time assessing the economic viability of this. And is this scalable? Can we make this a real industry for Washington County and help people diversify their incomes and really land protein? So project number one. Project number two, I'm going to move through these pretty quick because I'm kind of up against it. Lobster pounds reimagined. So there are over 70 lobster pounds in the state of Maine, and very few of them are being used to hold lobsters because the economy just isn't there anymore. You don't have the price shifts that used to exist. Bait prices are through the roof. The cost of electricity has increased. So there are very few lobster pounds that are actually being used to pound lobsters, but they're great opportunities for aquaculture. One of the things is it really should be easy to get a lease in these. Because a lot of the hurdles of getting an intertidal or a lease in general from the Department of Marine Resources really are negligible in lobster pounds. You're not taking bottom away from any fisherman, which, there's no one fishing in your lobster pounds. So you shouldn't be bothering any fisherman by growing oysters or clams or whatever in there. There's no hazard to navigation. No one's sailing a boat through your lobster pound. So that's a moot point. The lobster pound owner is typically the riparian landowner. So you own the land around the pound, which is usually a huge barrier to leases, because you need to get riparian landowner input up to 1,000 feet from your lease. So that should be a hurdle that's easy to overcome. The water tends to be warmer inside the pound than outside the pound. So that opens up a new opportunity to grow species that you might not be able to grow outside of the pound, but they might grow great inside. They're very well protected, so you don't have to worry about your gear getting trashed like they would in the open ocean. And you typically have good access to the site to be able to launch boats, and often electricity, which is very helpful. So the question is, can you grow an eastern oyster in Washington County? The state of Maine is going through an oyster boom right now, with oyster farms popping up all over the place. It's a very high value product sold by the piece. It's a boutique industry, and we thought, these lobster pounds are just perfect for this. So in 2020, what we did was we reached out to as many lobster pound owners as we could and said, do you want to participate in a study funded through the Maine Technology Institute to assess the viability of growing oysters in your lobster pounds? And we had 14 different test locations in eastern Maine, most of which were in Washington County. And what we did was we applied for leases that we could do this legally through the Department of Marine Resources. We took a 4mm floating oyster bag, which is common gear, 100 of these tiny little 7mm oyster seed, put them in the bag along with a hobo temperature logger, which takes the temperature of the water every 30 minutes throughout the course of the summer, and deployed them in the lobster pounds. And then we went back in November and opened the bags back up, and some of them had just giant oysters in them. This oyster in the screen grew over 2 inches in one summer. And between the temperature loggings and the oyster growth, we were able to tell the lobster pound owner, either A, we really think this is going to work for you in your location, or B, boy, your water is a little too cold and it just might not be good enough for you. And so the hobo logger spit out a reading like this. And what happens here is an American oyster really doesn't grow much above under 60 degrees Fahrenheit. And you really want the water to be above 70 degrees Fahrenheit to get optimal growth. So we looked and said, based on the temperature alone, this pound right here is suitable for oyster production. And there's currently a commercial farm in this pound now. And part of this went back to selective breeding. It's really, you hear this from us all the time. We selectively breed everything. All of the oysters that are commercially available, the oyster seed, either come from Rutgers or from Virginia Institute of Marine Sciences. They're really not made for cold water that we have in Eastern Maine. So that's why you don't see a lot of oyster farms. So what we did was we want to make an oyster that will grow here, not just in lobster pounds. So we were able to obtain some brood stock that we were able to manipulate that were unlicensed, and able to spawn them together and produce all these little tiny babies that swim around just like this. That's what a 10-day-old oyster looks like. And grow them out in the waters here. And what we're doing is we're taking the fastest growing animals that we can, and then we're breeding them together. And we're just going to continue to do this. This is in its infancy. we're only 3 years into this, but we have made our first and second crosses. And it looks like at least we will be able to do something to provide a seed resource to Eastern Maine oyster farmers. So after they settle, again, very small animals, they go into these little cones and look like sand, just like little bits of dust, even though you're probably looking at 200,000 oysters in that little cone right there. And at this point, they're actually ready to leave the hatchery. So they're ready to go onto the farms. So one of the lobster pounds that we tested in 2020, it was our second best growing pound. Really good opportunity. We approached the owner, which is Albert Carver at AC Inc. This pound is real close to home for us. It resides in between Great Wass Island and Beals Island, as well as Dobbins Island. So there's actually 3 islands bordering this called the Flying Place. And we went to Albert and said, I think you got an opportunity here. I really do believe that this is a large enough pound and it's warm enough that you can start a commercial farm. And he was delighted with the idea, but just not quite ready to make the jump on his own. So he asked us, would you like to start a farm here? Would you like to do a demonstration farm and, show me that this works, and then I'll take it and run with it. So we were delighted for the opportunity to do that. So we took some of our little tiny baby seeds, around 600,000, and put them into an upweller unit here, which is just a big tank with water flowing into it from the pound. The water's forced up through screens in the bottom of barrels. And what that allows you to do is to take a tiny little speck of oyster that, at a size where they sit on a 1 millimeter screen is worth $7 per thousand, and turn them into a larger oyster, which these ones in this hand right here were $22 per thousand. We can do that in about 3 weeks using this device right here. Huge cost savings. And if you're going to do anything at scale, it makes sense to buy the smallest seed you can and grow them up. So we grew them up to this size right here, put them in floating oyster bags. Each one of these bags has about 2,000 oysters in it, depending on the size. As they grow, you need to continue to expand into more and more bags. These are all bought locally through Brooks Trap Mill. So everything we bought pretty much comes, from a main vendor. And those teensy tiny little oysters turn into pretty big oysters very quickly. And there is some work involved in this. There's husbandry, as with any farming. As they grow, they need to be sorted by size and cleaned up. So we made this little homemade oyster tumbler here. You want to talk about a lot of holes drilled? Right there is a lot of holes drilled. And what this little unit does is we'll separate the oysters by size as well as tumble and clean them. And that tumbling is really important because we're going for a half shell market here. We want a single oyster because it's worth the most money. So this process of going through this rotating drum here not only separates them by size, but also breaks them apart and cleans them up. And it's really a slick unit here. If we were to buy one of these, it probably would have cost us 30 grand. This was about 900 bucks. So we separate them by size, and then we rebag them and deploy them. And what we found is that it looks like this farm is going to be very viable. We didn't expect to have a harvest in 2022, but it looks like we will have a harvest, probably over 100,000 pieces, which we think the annual production of this pound really conservatively is probably around 300,000 market oysters annually, with a wholesale value of about $225,000. It's a unique farm because it is the easternmost commercial oyster farm in the United States. So, I think with some unique marketing and tapping into local markets, because again, where do you go to buy a fresh oyster in Washington County? I think there are restaurants, there are consumers who would like to have this product, and we can offer it for a very competitive price. And it's really nice to have local seafood available. Now, we are the easternmost farm, but we're not the only farm. This farm right here is owned and operated by Gus Francis in Steuben. He is a lobster buyer and seller. He has 2 large impoundments that his family has owned for decades, but they're not in the lobster pounding business anymore because he can't make money on it. Gus was one of our lobster pound study participants, and the day we launched the bag, he didn't want to wait for results. He went right out and bought a bunch of oyster seed and the gear to grow it. And right now he has hundreds of thousands of oysters floating in his pounds in Steuben. He is already harvesting commercial product and will continue to do so. He has a fairly sizable farm there. So right now we have 2 oyster farms in Washington County. I foresee a lot more as people see the opportunity that could be to grow a product in their lobster pounds. And oysters certainly isn't the only product. We also have a project looking at growing scallops in lobster pounds. Those that are too cold to grow oysters may be optimal for scallops or clams or some other product. But there's just so much infrastructure sitting there with so much value and potential that we feel that people are going to turn and use these lobster pounds for aquaculture because they're very well suited to do so. All right, topic number 3, clam farming, as well as community engagement. So one species that we've been working on here at DEI for the past 8 or 9 years is this beast right here. It's an Arctic surf clam. They are native to the Gulf of Maine, but they're not found in huge commercial populations. They're all wild harvested in the Canadian Maritimes, and it accounts for about a $50 million annual production of this deep water species. They're primarily harvested by dredge on these large factory ships where they're brought up, they're flash cooked, and then flash frozen for the sushi industry, primarily in Japan, where they're prized as this giant hokigai surf clam. It has a unique property that when you cook this clam, the mantle, siphon, and foot in particular turns this brilliant red color. And that foot is the only product that's really used in the sushi industry as a giant clam. And as you saw on the previous slide, they're very valuable. So we said, gosh, there's a lot of potential here for this animal. It grows in cold water. It's very valuable. We got to be able to grow this. So, we figured out how to grow it in the hatchery and produce the seed. And for the past 8 or 9 years, we have been trying to grow these things in the low intertidal. We knew that they could. They're clams, so they can survive there. It's not really where they would normally live, in anywhere from 50 to 200 feet of water, but we thought we could do it. So we figured out how to grow them in the hatchery, which was fairly straightforward. I wouldn't say as easy as clams, soft shell clams that we've been growing for 30 years, but it's possible. And then we put them into situations that, we use to grow soft shell clams that we know, put them under nets. Well, guess what? These things are not as easy to grow as soft shell clams. They have a very large siphon, which you'll see in one of the slides, that sticks right up on the sediment. They don't bury very deep. They really sit very close to the surface. And between that nice fleshy siphon that sits right on the mud surface and the production of some sort of chemical stimulant that green crabs can smell and just say, oh, exotic meat. For 8 years, we have been largely unsuccessful at grow out of this particular species. And I shouldn't say that. The last couple of years, we made some incredible gains, which you're about to see here. So we've gone through several phases of how do we protect them better. from, different screening to pipes that are forced into the sediment to growing them in oyster bags. We've been through a lot of iterations here, but this has been the most successful, which is a wooden box. And again, once this would be commercialized, we wouldn't use wood. We would use some sort of composite that isn't going to break down, with an enormous amount of screening. So what we have is a wooden box with a little bit of sand in it. We throw the seed in and screw them down with a protective top with 4 layers of protective screening. And we just thought, you know what, if a crab can get into this thing and destroy these, we're done. We just can't protect them any better than this. This is as good as it gets. So the clams are trapped in here in the low intertidal. We have 2 sites this year, one in Beals Island and one in Gouldsboro. And we're working off work that started in 2019, trying this to develop these boxes. And we put them in the spring, secure them, and we walk away. They do get a little fouled. They do tend to stay in place because they're staked down to the mud. And then we go back in November and open them up. And to our surprise, in 2019, oh my gosh, there's a bunch of live clams. You can see their fleshy siphons sitting right on the surface. If you're a green crab walking by, as you can assume, there's a T-bone steak, you're going to eat that. But they can't get into the boxes, which keeps them safe. And what we found in 2019 is 99% survivorship. Unbelievable. So in 2020, we repeated the project with larger size boxes and still got very, very high survivorship and very good growth for the product. And then this year we expanded even further, and next year we're expanding with larger and larger containers to get to a commercial scale. So, the question is, can we grow them? Yeah, it does seem that we can. The cold water of Washington County is well suited to growing this species. This will add some diversity to our local aquaculture market, because we do believe we can sell a petite surf clam, which is sub 2 inches. It'll be the only place you can get them in the world. So it's really a very unique product. They can survive in the low intertidal. So it may make it a little easier if you're, let's say, a clammer and you want to have a side hustle as a small Arctic surf clam farmer. There's value there. And there's a very potential for a high value product because it's unique and you can't get it anywhere else. It really opens up a great opportunity. And there's currently no farm production in the world. This is the only place in the world you can see this being done. Really quickly, my last topic here, I just wanted to touch on a really great project that we're getting into along with Bob at DSF, working with the Triad at Zabayak to start community clam gardens. In 2020, apparently, they started a community vegetable garden, which was very successful and got a lot of buy-in from the community. People were able to grow their own produce to enjoy in their homes. And they said, I wonder if you could do the same thing with clams. We just don't have many clams. And it's traditionally a very important subsistence protein source for them. So we were approached by some people, as well as Bob, to start some community clam gardens. So myself and this gentleman here, Brian Altivator, went out and installed 5 clam nets. These are 14 by 14 foot nets, which by the time you get them seated in the mud is 12 foot by 12 foot. This beautiful cove you're looking at here is Half Moon Cove, which is visible from the causeway there as you're going to Eastport. Under each one of these nets, we place 5,000 of the little soft shell clam babies that we grow at the Downeast Institute, cover them up with a net. And Brian has been watching them and tending them to make sure the nets stay in place and there's no nasty little green crabs in there. So hopefully November 12th, when we go to take the nets off, this is what we see is tons of clam holes. Everything did well. At that time, what we'll do is we'll sample, taking core samples using a large coffee can, removing them from the flats, taking them over to the local school and putting them into sieves, washing away the sediment and seeing what story they tell us. We can measure growth and survivorship on the hatchery clams because the hatchery clams lay a very unique mark right here at the hinge. And that is the exact size that clam was when it went into the mud. So we can always tell our clams from other clams as well as be able to look at the growth. And then we're also going to get wild clams like this guy over here that naturally recruit into the net. Community involvement is a huge part of this. So we want to do what we've done at other schools. Now, this is from Sumner High School, involving students in this, because this is our future. And it's really a great opportunity for them to do some hands-on science that's actually kind of fun. So next spring, what we're going to be doing is working with them to deploy some plant pot experiments, and using this 6-inch plant pot like you'd buy a basil plant in from a nursery. We're going to take and go to some different flats in Sabayag, fill these with mud, put in 12 live clams. Some of them will be netted, like the one in the bottom right-hand corner, so no predators can get in. Some of them will be unnetted, but with little fence. The fence allows, basically, it keeps the clams from jumping out of the pot, but crabs can go right in and smash them up if they want. And the students will help us put these into the mud, just like we've been doing for the last 30 years, working with communities and children to educate them on what we can do to preserve this resource. And then in the fall, we'll sieve out all the sediment, measure them, and use the data that they gain to assess which is the best flat in their municipality to establish a larger scale, not clam farm, but community garden. And really a unique way of thinking about this. I don't know any other community that's approached, like clam conservation in this way, where people will have their own little garden plots or a shared plot that they can then go and harvest for their own enjoyment. So we're really excited to be part of that project, and I'm excited to learn more about their heritage and how this relates to them. And with that, I'd like to thank the many funders that have made this work possible. As I said, we've been at this now for 34 years, starting off with soft shell clams and really expanding to all sorts of things. And I just can't wait to see what the future brings. And I hope we can continue to bring economic opportunity to the residents of Washington County.
Excellent. Thank you, Kyle.
Yep.
That was great. Loved all the photos. Wondered if we couldn't start off with a live question. Is someone in the group? Can they show themselves and we'll call on you? Maybe Kyle will call on you to ask a question. All right, so I'll give you a few minutes. There are a couple questions. Oh, great. Thank you, Mindy.
Hi, I would love to know more about like this side on the high school part. Like, my son's a senior and he's now saying like, no, he's just not interested in college. I'd love to see, like, is there any kind of displays that you do for like such as this? I mean, this is fascinating. Is there any kind of displays like you do for the high schools if they were to reach out?
Absolutely. So very similar to what Megan Sorby had said about working with Jonesport High School, we are currently working with them as well through their aquaculture program. We have students here 3 days a week in the hatchery. We just recently, through the Build Back Better plan, received a substantial amount of money for internships as well as apprenticeships with high school students. So, there's no better opportunity than hands-on training. And we want to do a lot of that. I need people to come work at the oyster farm. I need people to come work at the mussel farm and in the hatchery. So absolutely, there's an enormous amount of potential here. Our workforce is expanding rapidly as we continue to take on more projects, especially ones like larger scale farms. We want to hire people from Washington County. We want local people to come here and work and stay here is the main thing. So yes, absolutely, there's opportunity.
Is there associated funding? I think this actually came up in a conversation with Bob, maybe around transportation support, for interns or folks in apprenticeship so that they can get there.
Yeah, well, all of our internships and apprenticeships are paid. We are offering like unpaid, because if they come here during the school day, technically we're not allowed to pay them. But we do have funds to do that. So yes, we have supports for people to come here. If there's travel assistance necessary, absolutely. We're fortunate to have housing on site. So during the summer, we hire interns, mostly from the University of Maine system, but we post all over. And they live right here on site in our guest house. We also have a very nice dormitory. So yeah, we have the support to bring people here and show them how to make a great career for themselves.
Thank you.
Yep.
Can I ask another question? You mentioned if somebody wanted to get into the farming aspect of it. Obviously down where you're located, there's probably flats right there that you're able to do your growing in. How would someone do that and not have, say, somebody mess with it? Like, how would they find a spot? Because obviously nobody owns the clam flats.
Yeah, so that's why you don't see clam farming, to be honest with you. So there's a couple different hurdles, and I can go on for about 45 minutes on this. But let's say you have a flat in front of your house and you want to do a clam farm. Well, your first step is you got to go to the local clam committee, because this is all municipal control. And you have to say to them, I want this acre of mud right here for myself, and you can't come dig here, because that's what a lease allows you. So that is usually the death to most clam farms, because, you know, they're a hunter gatherer. They have traditional use of the area. Maybe their grandfather took them clamming on that flat when they were kids. So they have, you know, emotional buy-in. So that's your number one hurdle, is you need to get them to say, absolutely, you can have that acre. There may be thousands and thousands of acres of intertidal in that municipality, and you're asking for that 1 acre for yourself, but that could be a major holdup. If you get them to say, okay, yeah, sure, you can have that acre for yourself, then you got to go through the Department of Marine Resources and apply for a lease. And the thing that's going to hold up your lease is, after you have buy-in from the local clam committee, you need to have every riparian landowner in 1,000 feet say, go for it, you can have it. And if one person within 1,000 feet of that says, I really don't want to see these nets in front of my house, that project is dead. So if you can get all that lined up, then you got to worry about ecology. And, you know, are clams going to grow there? Can you keep them safe? Not just from green crabs, but also from biped predators, poachers, people who are going to want to come to your farm and take what's yours. So there are a lot of hurdles. Although if we had a record high clam price this year, with people getting over $300 a bushel, I can tell you, when I've done economic assessments of clam farms, I didn't have $5 a pound on any of my spreadsheets. So the viability is looking better and better, and we're going to continue to have a decrease in harvest. Last year was the lowest clam harvest in the state's record history. So you know, people are going to want to continue to come to clam and get their fried clam basket. Okay, so the value of this product is going to continue to be sustained. So I do believe that you'll see clam farming in the near future.
Great. I just want to thank Kyle again for this wonderful presentation. I think we're any minute now going to be launched back to our plenary session to revisit the larger group. So thank you all for attending. And we'll have a couple seconds to take a breath before you get shuttled off.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you, Kyle.